Baby Reindeer is a very powerful and an incredible story. My heart was shattered and it fell into pieces. It shakes us as it is a true story. The writer, the protagonist, and the actor of this drama is the same person, Richard Gott. The story itself is so powerful, but I think what makes the show this successful is Richard Gott's writing. So I will delve into his subtle writing and I will explain how the show is perfectly aligned with philosopher Nietzsche's definition of good tragedy. The show starts with Donnie offering a cup of tea to Marta in the pub from the house. And when we look at Donnie's life at that stage, we can even say that he goes through a pathetic period in his life. He's just trying to be a comedian in London. He's working in the pub while trying to be a comedian, and he's living with his ex-girlfriend's mother. So he's going through a kind of a difficult period in his life. We can see how sad Marta is. With this kind gesture, Marta develops interest in Donnie, and this interest turns into stalking and obsession. On the other hand, what drives Donnie into Marta is his curiosity for her life. Curiosity is one of the most important feelings of humanity. There is a beautiful podcast called The Script Notes. It is hosted by screenwriters John August and Craig Mazin. And in one of the episodes, they were telling that when they were talking about the internal drives of the characters, curiosity is one of the very important internal drives. Donnie starts imagining stories about Marta's childhood, and then he tries to think what she would be doing in her free time, because for example Marta says that she is a lawyer and she works for very famous people, but then she cannot even afford a cup of tea. Marta also, on the other hand, sees the internal wounds and the suffering of Donnie, and then these two characters start looking at each other. In the end, that curiosity turns into a nightmare for Donnie. And with that tension, the tragedy starts. Tragedy is actually an art form and it is associated with ancient Greece. According to Aristotle, a Greek philosopher, through chaotic events creating pity and fear, we experience a series of emotions thanks to tragedies. The hero of the tragedy should have good and bad manners. Only then we can have sympathy for him. At this stage, Donnie cannot stand against Marta as he develops his curiosity and empathy. Donnie desires for success in comedy to overcome his own struggles in life, while Marta wants to feel connected as she is so lonely. And she has apparently a mental health disease and the system has already failed her. And that tension between them and the terror caused by Marta leads the story. Waiting to see from which corner Marta can appear and what she can do next creates the stress. We get more tense while watching the show. Marta opens deeper wounds in Donnie's life because Donnie is kicked out of the house that he was living with the mother of his ex-girlfriend, because the ex-girlfriend is preoccupied for her mother and her mom's safety, and Donnie's comedy acts become violated by Marta, and the woman Donnie loves, whose name is Terry, gets harmed by Marta. So Donnie actually goes into a free fall because of the presence of Marta in his life. And then comes the fourth episode. Thanks to this episode, we understand and learn why Donnie does not resist Marta. That's one of the turning points of the story as we meet the real villain of this show. A producer named Darian, promising a bright future for Donnie, grooms, manipulates, and sexually assaults Donnie. Despite the suffering and the pain Donnie goes through, even though he knows that it is bad that he returns to Darian's house, he goes again and again. And it is really hurtful and hard episode to watch. The depiction of how people who have been sexually assaulted may feel is reflected in a subtle way. The events are brutal, but the writing, directing and the acting is so powerful. How the show makes us question why Donnie keeps going back to Darian is so compelling that it shines as a great example of a good tragedy according to the terms of Nietzsche. According to Nietzsche, even though the tragedies open doors to human suffering and pain, watching the misery helps us to be more human. Nietzsche, in his book The Birth of Tragedy, tells that through the destruction of the hero in the tragedy, we see that every one of us suffer in this world. And this makes us say yes to life and accept the challenge, even though there's incredible amount of suffering in this world. He also rejects the understanding of Socrates, who claims that everything should have a logic. Socrates says that every behavior of human beings is reasonable. And if there is suffering, then the humans do not know the necessary virtues and the knowledge. According to Socrates, all evil a human can do stems from ignorance. However, Nietzsche says that humans may act without a reason. For Nietzsche, instincts are the primal creative force. Nietzsche rejects that everything is rational and can be explained. Tragedies make us accept the existence of traumas and the evil. Tragedy was giving its audiences comfort by bringing them face to face with the most awful truths of human existence. And when we, the audience, see the suffering of a hero in a tragedy, we forget the exclusivity of our own particular suffering. And we see the hero as an example which shows that all people suffer. So Nietzsche prefers actually instinct over intellect. Maybe that's the reason why Donnie was acting in such a way despite all the suffering that he was going through. With the pain and suffering of Donnie, first we also develop empathy for what he goes through. Yes, we witness him suffer and be destroyed, however he still moves on. Despite this disaster he goes through, he still survives. He still moves on somehow. He still tries to be a comedian, yes, hurt, yes, insecure, but he's alive. And that makes him a hero. Through his suffering and through all this evil, we also find a reason to live and endure this life. We remember that every person suffers. While we witness Donnie's pain, we also associate our pain with his. But then things got even worse for him. He breaks up with Terry. Marta physically assaults him, and his co-workers do not give the necessary support to him. But then here comes the catharsis. Because catharsis, also an important element, also in the writings of Aristotle and also of Nietzsche. He releases all the emotions and the trauma he expressed on the stage. And that is such a powerful scene. It is a perfect monologue. I was just like crying out loud while I was watching that scene. And after he releases all these emotions, then he also faces his family. And he also learns that his father went through almost similar, same pain. That connection is also a part of the catharsis. The connection that he develops with his father through pain and suffering. And when he accepts his traumas, and when he makes other people laugh at his traumas, then he becomes much more stronger and he can move on living. And he even becomes a successful comedian. For Nietzsche, tragedy provides a metaphysical consolation and the catharsis. And also, for example, if you talk about Richard Gott, who is acting as Donnie and also who has this story, he also strengthens his catharsis as he was also acting this performance and that story on stage over and over again, because that show beforehand was a theatric performance. He performed this story on the stage with 2 different plays. Actually, he also develops kind of an empathy as he was writing and performing these characters all through years. When he accepts his pain, he opens the door to become a very good comedian. We are all watching this show together, and as this show has become viral, it also makes us as a society, as a group, to live through this catharsis together. And then there comes the end, where we see Donnie in the pub and a bartender is offering a free drink for him. Because at this stage, the story becomes complete because Donnie turns into a Martha in the end. That transformation starts after Martha goes into the prison. Donnie becomes Martha and Martha becomes Donnie. But it is not because now Donnie will be the villain. Because Donnie also feels desperate, fragile, powerless and alone, like Martha herself at the beginning of the show. It was actually the situation of Martha when Donnie offered a cup of tea to her. Today, the modern stories, the modern shows, and when the heroes feel powerful. But over here in this show, on the contrary, actually, just like in Greek tragedies, the story ends when the hero becomes destroyed or when he feels powerless. It also shows us as a society of today, maybe we shouldn't give so much importance and meaning to the concepts of success and power. Because Donnie wanted to be successful, and that fixation on success let him go through incredible pain and suffering. And also Martha, as she wanted not to feel alone, as she just wanted to feel connected and belonging, she hurt Donnie. Remember, Martha was also telling stories about how she was so successful, how she was in connection with famous and successful people in this world, with politicians and celebrities. And maybe today, the power, the ambition, and success has been so much emphasized that there is so much pain and suffering in all of these concepts. Maybe that's what we should reconsider as human beings of today. If Donnie's father would have told what he went through from the beginning, before all these years, maybe Donnie wouldn't go through the same path. Maybe he wouldn't go through sexual assault like his father, because his father would already had shared what he went through, and then they could talk about it. Chain of sexual assault would end at some point. Maybe that's the reason we should be encouraged to be more open, to share our feelings more, and to be more fragile instead of being powerful and being successful. That also plays some part in today's masculinity crisis. Let me give you data about how this show is so powerful to break that chain of silence or of not talking about our pain. There is one male sexual assault charity called We Are Survivors, and they say that since the very first day Baby Reindeer was broadcasted in Netflix, they have seen an astronomical 53% increase in referrals. Maybe today a hero's journey should be through kindness, vulnerability, and love. Maybe it's not that difficult to turn into Martha that we have been undermining since the very first moment of the show. Richard God, while he was acting this performance on stage by himself, he was also acting for Martha. He was also becoming Martha on the stage. And that's the reason that show is also part of the catharsis process of Richard God. Moreover, Baby Reindeer also shows that sometimes we just don't complete our process of transformation. Sometimes it's hard to find peace within ourselves. Sometimes we just cannot maybe take revenge from the villains in our lives. Sometimes going through trauma can take longer than anticipated. Maybe sometimes we have to live with our open wounds, just like Martha and Donnie. There have been so many emotions, there have been so many sincere statements in Baby Reindeer, and I think that's what makes this show that successful and incredible and very good.